Christian, welcome to the Roadman Cycling Podcast.
Thank you, my dude. Good to be here.
Good to have you. How's life?
It's good, man. Just got done calling Paris-Nice with Bob Roll, stage number 3. I haven't told you any of the results because I don't want to give them away. It's been a fun race, and it's always interesting to be calling a race remotely. Bob's all the way across the country. I'm on the East Coast. He's on the West Coast. Yeah, I'm just thankful that I have such a good friend to call the races with. So yeah, I just got done with doing that for the last 3 hours, and I'm here with you.
How does that work? I was shocked when you logged on. I was expecting you to be in some sort of flashy studio, and you're at home.
Yeah, this is a positive result of COVID. Instead of having people come into what was, for NBC at least, Stamford, Connecticut, where the hub of all of NBC Sports is, they made remote units to go pretty much everyone. And I believe David Miller was doing the same thing for ITV in Europe or in England. And it's really started with golf. And they pulled it off with golf. And this is like 2 or 3 months into COVID was, I think, one of the first real big organized sports was a golf tournament. No fans, obviously, just the golfers. It worked greatly. All those guys did it from their homes in Arizona and Florida. And then we followed suit later on with the Dauphiné doing that. And it's been fantastic. There is a bit of a delay, which is inconvenient at times. It's kind of like an old school, long distance phone call that you'd have where you have a delay back and forth. So for quick witted things, when you're having things where you just want to say that's funny back and forth, that puts a damper on it. But apart from that, it's pretty easy. And the fact that I come downstairs with my coffee and my pajamas and call races at 4 o'clock in the morning, it's much better than being in a hotel.
It's kind of a bit of a Pulp Fiction chat where we're starting at the end rather than starting at the beginning. Since finishing up with bike racing, because for a lot of our European listeners, they don't see you doing your punditry role on TV analysis work. So they're like, whoa, here's a blast from the past. What have you been up to? How's life?
It's been great, man. I mean, it's not easy to retire. And anyone says it's been an easy transition, they're lying. I mean, I don't care what sport you're coming from, especially if you're lucky enough like myself to have a long career. I will say that on that note, though, I was lucky to retire when I wanted to retire. I wasn't forced into retirement. So that was already a positive. But nonetheless, it's not easy to transition. So I just jumped into everything, man. I was a money manager for a year. I helped out with CPA, and we started our own union here who wasn't represented here in the United States. So I was president of that for the last 7 years. Just really, honestly, just went everywhere. And then broadcasting as well. And then I moved from a different state. It was in Chicago when we finished in Girona. And we realized that there's no way that we could live in Chicago anymore. That's where my wife and I both grew up. And so now we live in Greenville, South Carolina. So it's been a full gas last 10 years. And then fast forward to the last year and a half, 2 years, we've been started with the breakaway, which we've talked about before with Jordan Corbett. And that's been fantastic. This is kind of like going to graduate school or business school for me to be a part of the breakaway right now as well. So yeah, pretty much have my fingers in a lot of different things. And, but the constant has been broadcasting for the last 10 years. And it's incredible to say that I'm on my 10th year now. I can't believe it. I mean, this is not a career path that I ever looked forward to. I was like, I can't wait I'm going to try to get into broadcasting afterwards. I never thought for a million years I would ever do this. Here I am.
So the generation before yours, you're kind of sandwiched in the middle where you look at riders now and the big stars or the equivalent stars to the level you were at, you're rolling fourth in the Tour de France. These guys are absolutely set for life in terms of the amount of cash they're making.
True.
The generation before you, they definitely weren't. Like we're seeing, Paul Kimmage still writes for our local newspaper over here. Now, he wasn't rolling fourth in Tour, so it's maybe not a brilliant analogy, but most of the guys from that generation, they're still working, they're still hustling. Your generation's sitting in the middle.
Yeah.
Did you guys make enough money to sail off into the suns?
I'll just stop right there. No, no, there's no way. I was always, luckily, I had really good tutelage from my parents about saving money and putting money in places that will grow in the future. Did okay in real estate a couple times, but for the most part, no, there's no way. Not with the lifestyle that I like to lead with my friends and family. And I wouldn't want to be retired anyways, Anthony. What are you going to do? Just keep ride your bike? I mean, it'd be horrible. I still get to ride my bike a couple times a week, and 4 or 5 times I'm happy. Honestly, when I retired from the sport, I didn't think I'd really ride my bike that much at all. I hated it at times. I had so much injury. I didn't feel comfortable on the bike. I really thought of it as an occupation, not a lifestyle. And it didn't take long to realize that, oh my goodness, I need the bike. I love it. And it's therapy, and to be surrounded with great friends as well. And I have the luxury of riding with George Hincapie and Bobby Julich, 2 of my old teammates and some of my best friends on the planet. In my backyard. I mean, I do not take that for granted at all.
What's going on with, I want to get into chatting about your dad, who's obviously a massive influence on your choice to become a cyclist, but we're seeing it so often now. Like a friend of mine that I know you're ex-teammates with, Michael Barry, his young lad Ashlyn, super rider at the moment. George's kid looks like he's killing it at the moment as well. I thought the expression was, show me a great man that's the son of a great man.
I love that expression, and I agree with it as well. My dad was my hero growing up. So I always just wanted to do everything he did. So from 3 or 4 years old, I was already riding bikes with my dad. When he would start his ride and I'd hear the tires being pumped up. He always rode tubulars because he's old school. You hear, 120 PSI in the garage. And I would wake up at 5:30 and I'd run over there and ride and take my little Schwinn Pixie for the first, 3 or 4 miles with him. And then he'd bring me back home and then he'd go out for his 40, 50 mile ride. And that's how I grew up, just emulating everything my dad did. And then, of course, as a teenager, you're like, well, if my dad could do it, it can't be that hard, right? I mean, it's some ridiculous mentality. But yeah, then fast forwarding now and getting to see the kids. I mean, I literally have seen Enzo since he was born, with us in Girona or back in here in Greenville. The pictures I have of him, I'm going to be able to embarrass him for the end of the days. And same thing goes with Ashlyn, as we all grew up as small families in Girona, and Girona wasn't the city that it is today. There wasn't 120 some pro cyclists in town. It was just a small community of people. Michael was my roommate and George lived across the street, and there was only a few of us. And then we just made it happen, really. So to see the new generation coming up, and I agree with you with your statement, is it doesn't always happen with kids. But, I always tell people if my dad was Greg Norman, maybe I would have been playing golf, but he isn't. And, I've known guys like Jim Akowitz, for example, used to come over and take my bed when I was 1 year old and 2 years old and literally change my diapers, and they became my bosses later on. So it's like, it's kind of born into I didn't know how much I knew is it probably the best way. And I think the same thing goes with Enzo. He doesn't appreciate, I think he appreciates, I don't think he realizes how much he knows without reading a book, without the kind of steps you need to take if your father isn't one of the best professional cyclists of all time, like George was.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that osmosis is so powerful. A friend of mine hosts a race just north of Toronto called Hell of the North. And Ashlyn won it last year. And after the race, he rang me and he was telling me about it. It was the wildest thing. He said Michael was on the front of the brake because he's back riding a little bit and he's driving the brake clear. And he said Ashlyn was sitting behind him. But he said just the way he carried himself and the way he moved on the bike, he's like, he looked like a world tour rider. He said the way he changed his arm warmers, like he took his hands off the bars for like 2 seconds and the arm warmers were off, folded neatly and in the back pocket. And he said he's just picked up so much from living like around you guys his whole life.
Yeah. And he's got the double whammy. Let's not forget about Dee Dee, his mom. Not so bad rider herself. Second place in the Olympic Games. I mean, Dee Dee Demet at the time, now Dee Dee Berry. We grew up with them as well. She was in the Midwest. She grew up in Milwaukee, so only about an hour and a half, 2 hour drive from Chicago. So yeah, they have the double whammy. And what they did in their lifestyle, really, the Berries, that is, they always commuted on the bikes. Even though they lived downtown Toronto, they're always on a bike in some form of transportation and just having fun, whether it be even holiday, they'd be on the bikes at some point in time. And Ashton just grew to it. And how good he is, like you said, like looking like a professional. And he's 6'3", by the way, Anthony. He's a big boy. He's a big boy, big 15-year-old. And he's got everything in his quiver, though. He could sprint, he could time trial. And the biggest thing he has on everybody else is we don't have so much racing anymore for the kids. Whereas I could have gone every weekend and raced a different race when I was a teenager. These days, the races are few and far between. So what Ashlyn has is the track. And I encourage any youngster out there listening to this to race on the track as much as possible. And that's how I cut my teeth on the sport, and just learning a little bit of acumen about how you handle yourself within the peloton, going for sprints, how you line up for sprints, all these kind of things that take a little bit of a while to learn if you're just doing a criterium here and there.
So, because your dad was 2-3-time national champ and a couple of Olympics all on the track?
Yeah, he 2-time Olympian, 5-time national champion. Then he's one of the first professionals from the United States to try their hand in 6-day racing over in Europe before anyone was even thinking about riding on the road.
That's unreal.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think back. It really wasn't that long ago when I started, that this is 72 and then turning professional and not being able to race at all in the United States because everyone was amateur, right? So there's only 5 professionals. So what are you going to race against each other? 5 of you guys together on a track? It'd be ridiculous. So, and then fast forward, going to living in Rotterdam in some horrible basement apartment for many years. So yeah, he definitely, it was not easy for those guys to really get into the mafia over in the 6-day scene.
It's absolutely nuts. I'm thinking about your dad making that step over to Belgium, and that was ridiculous amount of friction to get over and do that. But also, when you were making the step, it wasn't exactly smooth transitions. It wasn't Google Maps.
No.
You have seconds to go over and find your way around. What was that transition like from amateur into the pro rank?
Oh man, I mean, we still have the same stigma, as any, yourself included, being English speaking in general. It was always our fault. The Italians would blame us for everything. If there's a crash in the peloton, you could be like 100 riders away. Fuck, Dio cane americano, che cazzo fa? It's always our fault. Then finally we started realizing, no, we could talk back to them and stick up for ourselves. And it really, the mentality started changing when Lance won the Tour de France in 99. And that still was our fault, but it got a little bit better because at this point in time, 98 was my first year. The Italians own the peloton. And it's crazy to think about that transition as well. There's a lot of Italians still in the peloton, but what teams are there? There's no teams. Zero in the World Tour. It's crazy to think that.
They're definitely gone as a force. Like, I'm thinking about those big Patreons of the peloton, like Cipollini. Like, he just looked like a scary dude. Like, there's no comparison to that in Italian riders at the moment.
No. Bugno. I mean, the Italians that they had back then, Ballerini, God rest his soul. I mean, there was just so many people out there like that, just bigger than life personalities as well, on and off the bike. Not like Chippo. Thank goodness there wasn't so many as like Chippo. There could only be one Chippo. But no, it's true. There's no one who is dominant, and I think that's everything changes, and change is good. And I think for the most part, it's good because the biggest difference between then and now, and what I say and why I'm still such a massive fan of the sport, is that the depth of the sport is so vast, where you only had a few people who could win a race who used to enter. And the top echelon of the sport was a lot smaller than it is today. And now you got guys all the way back who could still do 6 watts per kilo. It doesn't matter where you are in the sport. It's incredible amount of firepower from head to toe. And that's why it's so dangerous in the sport too, because there's so much pushing and shoving within the peloton. Not that high or top of the pyramid where it's so much smaller, where you wouldn't even dare go into the front.
Yeah, and the respect seems to be gone. Chatting with guys who are in the bunch now and have been there for the last 10, 15 years, they said it's just changing. Every year it's getting worse. Like, there's kids coming into the sport now who have literally never known life without aero socks.
Aero everything. I mean, we kind of wrecked the sport in Garmin. We were the first people to have skin suits going onto the Champs-Élysées, and people are giving us shit about that. Now they don't start a race without a skin suit. I mean, it's like everything has changed so vastly. But as far as the respect goes, yeah, of course. I mean, if you got kids who are so strong and they could do things coming out of the junior ranks, like we're talking with the juniors, we're talking about with Ashlyn and Enzo, they will be signed most likely if they continue this progression straight out of the junior ranks. And they could have sometimes the horsepower, but not necessarily the knowledge of how things go. So sometimes it is respect, sometimes it's not. But yeah, I'm happy to be on this side of the camera now and not inside the Terror Dome with those guys right now, because it's a brutal sport and it just gets harder and harder.
But you think they're going to have the same longevity in their career?
No.
For you, like 15, 17 years?
No.
High octane looks for me at the moment.
I agree. And especially signing pro as a 19-year-old and having that kind of pressure and backing up even farther, training as you need to be training already as a 15, 16-year-old. But the good part is they're training professionally and they're training with people who know what they're doing. So they're going to not lead them astray. We did everything wrong, especially with diet. Oh my goodness. I mean, don't get me started with how bad our diets were. Coming home, eyes sunken in, completely bonked off our face, and thinking that as a rite of passage. Oh yeah, I killed myself today. How stupid. You got nothing out of your training, and then eat the house down and then put on a kilo or two because you just ate 20 pounds of pasta when you got back home. It is interesting, and I think it's just really backing up to the 14, 15-year-olds already training better than most 25 and 28-year-olds did when they were professional in the 90s and 2000, early 2000s. So that's the biggest change. And whether or not they'll be professional for 15 to 18 years like we see most of my generation, I kind of doubt it, but that's okay. Just like you brought up immediately was, if I was to get 4th place today, I would definitely made a lot more money than I did, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I think about the concept of periodization in training, and for anyone that's not too familiar, it's periodization. It's the idea that we're gradually building up towards some sort of peak, and then we take a little bit of a taper, and then it's our main event. We think about that a lot of the time on a micro scale, like building up towards an event. But if you think about that on a macro scale over the course of someone's career, somebody used to come in, they'd cut their teeth in U23s, Neo Pro for a little bit, learn the ropes, graduate within a team up to a point, and you have your 2-3 years where you have a shot at really hitting the big races. You know, you're a protected rider for a couple of years. But now, like Jay Vine's been on the podcast a bunch of times, and you listen to his lifestyle, everything is weighed, everything is measured, from sleep to movements to ketones, and it's like, where's the progression on this? How do you periodize that in year 2? How do you tighten the belt in year 3, 4, 5, 6? It looks impossible.
Yeah. Well, let's just call a spade. Jay's a special character. I mean, I follow his career. I'm a big fan of what he's done in a short amount of time, coming from where he came from. But he's a special character. He is so by the book, and it's truly just it's his lifestyle from start to finish. I don't know if, you know, on the opposite side, Peter Sagan's never even seen a scale. He doesn't know how much he weighs. He doesn't even look at the road book. You know, obviously he's going out to pasture at the end of this year as well. But yeah, it's still a massive shift. I mean, I don't think Tade's exactly with the same mentality as Jay Vine would be. But it's always interesting to have cyclists and professional cyclists at the highest end of sport, or any sport there is. You have so many different personality variables. But yes, the amount of, I would say, just focus is required today, especially on diet and lifestyle, has to be the tipping point for a shorter career, just because it's not conducive for a long one. I mean, it's so hard to live like that day in and day out. And the off season is 4 days long now. It's not a month or two. It's like, oh, you had your break and then you're back on the bike doing incredible intervals already, because you have to get ready for December camp, which is insane to me.
It's hard even as a spectator watching the amount of cycling that's on.
It is, and back in 2005 when they brought the Pro Tour at the time, it made sense to really just have all the best riders at the biggest races, and that's all we want as a spectator, because we don't want to have, and we understand at the beginning of the year. Right now is a great example, having Paris-Nice and Trainer Adriatico going on at the same time. So you kind of have a little bit cut in half. Maybe have some better sprinters in Paris-Nice, but maybe not as good GC riders, or vice versa. Only the good thing about the Tour de France is that is the one race where we have truly the best riders in the world taking place. But there's just almost too much of it going on at all times, and you always want, as a spectator, to have the best on the day.
But do you think, I agree with you about the Tour, that it's the best riders competing against each other, but does the UCI relegation system fly in the face of that? Because we seen last year Israel not sending Sepp van Mark to the Tour to go hunting shitty one-day races to get points. No one wants to see that.
No one wants to see that. Last year was a mess on so many different levels, and you saw the same thing with EF, and you saw Lotto. There's a ton of those teams like that. Jayco was the same way. Matt White wasn't bringing Groenewegen to the Vuelta, for example, which he could have most likely got a couple stage wins from. It was a mess, but it did wake up a lot of teams. And EF is a great example of that. I mean, they're absolutely crushing this season. I mean, 10 wins already, and from different riders as well. And same thing goes with Lotto. They're doing fantastic. Arnaud Delisle, the next superstar of sprinting. So I'm against it as well. I don't like it. But at the same time, we have to have something where we can't have such a massive amount of professional cyclists all the time. And some of the smaller races are the ones that need to go. I mean, I hate to say that, because I love the small races. You want to see growth everywhere in the sport. But as a spectator and as a business model, we need to be able to see the best riders. When you flip on the television screen, you don't want to see three guys and, well, where is so-and-so and where's so-and-so? Well, if he was here, what it would have been? And you play that coulda, woulda, shoulda game. And really the only time we get to not say that is at the Tour.
With the Breakaway app, like, you've had a big focus on onboarding users of various different backgrounds and abilities. Like, I have friends who are just getting into cycling for the first time, and I've recommended the Breakaway app to them and they love it. But do you think cycling has a problem broader than that, trying to onboard people? Like, I had to work, I'm going to say, pretty intensively with my girlfriends to get her to buy into watching cycling. Sometimes she just didn't know what was going on. Like, try explaining the Tour de France to someone that, like, to an alien that comes down. You're like, it's 3 weeks long. There's a race every day, but we race over 3 weeks. Why are they sprinting for the top of that mountain? Why are they sprinting for that intermediate? You know, young leaders jersey, you could be under 25 and go for this white jersey, but it doesn't really matter because everyone that's going to win yellow is under 25 anyway. It's just really confusing what's going on.
Yeah. You know, it's hard. It's not the most approachable sport in the world. Let's just put it that way. It's a lot like golf in that regard. You may sometimes even worse, just because let's not forget about the cost that's involved as well. And now what I said earlier, like the lack of racing there is, like, well, how do I even get to that point? Where's a local club that's going to steer me in the right direction? Where's a coach? Where is the next race? Do I have to drive, 4 states just to see the first race at Gran Fondo? I mean, for the greater good, cycling's in a good place, I believe, with the Gran Fondos and gravel scene, things like that. And that's a little bit more approachable to most. But how do you make that giant leap from what you see on the television screen to what you have in your backyard? Yeah, that's I think that's a $1 million question that not too many people could answer.
How do you do it in commentary? Because I guess your commentary is steered towards who's watching, but when you're broadcasting to such a large audience, everyone from the hardcore cycling fan, my dad, who's going to bring you up on your pronunciation of some obscure Belgium.
Yeah, it's not easy. And it's gotten a lot better because our average viewer is so hardcore. We don't have a massive viewership here in the United States, but it's very consistent. So I think, I don't know, let's call it like 500,000 people every day. And our time isn't great. So West Coast, we come on air at 3:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, that's not early in the morning. That's late at night, right? So those people are really hardcore, whether they're watching on demand or what have you. And when I first started in 2014, it was a lot like that, a lot of hand holding, a lot of, this is explaining ad nauseum what's going on. But as we've progressed over the year and we made the show a lot better, we realized that we can talk to them. They want to be talked to as adults. They know what they're seeing on the television screen. So we can get in the weeds a little bit. So I like to go push it as far as I possibly can to give them some insight of what's going on and then pull it back and explain that a little bit in a little bit longer to the people who might just be turning on the television for the first time.
I want to take a slight little left turn and jump back to the beginning of your career. So you're just signed pro with Postal in 1998. Then you're selected for the 1999 tour, which is, the Redemption Tour. And you guys go and win the tour. I've had George on the podcast, and he was just talking about how little, you guys knew about control on a race, having a yellow jersey. What was that like being inside a team, quite a new team, winning the biggest bike race in the world?
Oh, it's crazy, man. I mean, I remember at home, because I didn't even have a house at that point in time. So I was staying at my parents in between races for, I think, the month of May. And Johan Brunel called up the house phone. Everyone knows what a house phone is. The house phone and talked to me for saying, "Hey, could I talk to your dad?" And he literally asked my dad if it'd be okay if we took your son to the Tour de France, because I was so young. And to your conversation earlier, young riders didn't do the Tour de France because they thought that this is going to impede their progression in the sport. Yeah, of course, my dad was excited. He talked to Johan, of course, and be back into the sport. He felt like he was attached to it, but that how much of a big deal it was as I just turned 23 that day, I believe. But fast forward to the race, it was just ignorance for myself, at least. I was in the best young rider jersey, but actually, sorry, I take that back. We didn't have a jersey. I just got flowers every day. So I didn't get the white jersey on the front every day, but that's really started the psychology, and Johan really brought the psychology of sitting on the front, like Ineos done and like Team Sky and many teams afterwards, because we weren't the best. And a lot of times we were dying 1,000 deaths while we were on the front, but psychologically behind them, everyone thought that we were just unstoppable, even though we kind of sucked in honesty. I mean, we didn't suck, but we were just holding on for grim death at all times, in the buses that we had, or I should say the camper vans that we had, like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang 1 and 2. I mean, to put it this way, there wasn't even room for me to sit down. So I just laid on the floor in the camper van and listened to my Discman, listened to Beastie Boys the whole time. So it was like, I wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. So I didn't have that much pressure on me. And I just had a great time. And it was a truly American team for really the first and last time. Maybe 7-Eleven, of course, and Motorola, but really that year it was a strong American team. And we just had a really fun time because we were never supposed to be there in the first place. We were the Bad News Bears, and yeah, it was a really fun race.
Pink jersey, was that 2007 in the Giro when you took it? 2007, 2008?
8.
I've had Sven Tuft on the podcast, and he talked to me through the emotions when he took, it was, I'm going to say 2014 in Dublin in the Giro, he took the pink jersey. And he talked through how his career, he felt like maybe he didn't need it, that it wasn't necessary until he got it. And when he said he got it, it was just validation for not just himself, but the sacrifice that the family goes through, partners go through, the work that mechanics have done through the years. Everyone that's invested into you, it's just a moment for them. Did you feel that way?
Absolutely. Sven is one of my favorite people on the planet Earth.
He's such a rock star, and I've had him on the podcast, I'd say twice, and I've been on his, and anytime I get a chance to talk to him, he's just the coolest fucking stories. Like, shit like that just never happens to me. He fights with wolves and stuff.
Yeah, you put it this way, his dream in life at that point in time when we were teammates was he was into jiu-jitsu and wrestling, these kind of things, to be attacked. So he wanted to be ready for attack. So if he's just walking down the street, that someone's going to attack him. And so we were trying to find some guy. And I had one of my old friends from the Olympic Training Center who was a medalist at the Olympics in Greco-Roman wrestling. And I was going to hire this guy just to attack him. And that would be the funniest thing ever. He would have loved it. Even if he got his ass kicked, he was so G'd up for it. Regardless, to your question, yeah, it was very similar to Mr. Tuft. And it was a team time trial. I came across the line first. We were flying that day. We put a lot of work into it. That's when we started with Ice Vest, for example. That's when the invention kind of thing, or not invention, but at least in cycling, for the warm-up protocol from Alan Lim. We got a lot of stupid looks, and I remember freezing my ass off on the start line and soaking wet because our Ice Vest sucks so bad. So all the water was down in my shoes and sloshing to the start line and freezing. I'm like, this better fucking work, Alan. I'm going to kill you. And we did a great race, obviously won. But it wasn't until seeing Franco Pellizotti. So I lost it by like a half second the next day. And in the World Championship course from 1993, a really hard circuit that we did, 12,000 feet of climbing at stage number 1. And I lost it by half a second in a little time gap. I call it an Italian second that I lost to, because I don't know still to this day if I really lost it or not. But regardless, when I saw Franco up on the stands and him crying, then I realized, like, holy shit, this is so much bigger than I thought. I was just rolling with it. I was trying to defend it, to Sven's point, all the sacrifice that my wife and being at home with the kids year after year, it was a validation to that. But then when I saw Franco crying, and that also gave me the belief system going into the Tour de France that year as well. That changed my mentality, that I could really be here, that I deserve to be here. Sorry for my dog barking in the background. She gets a little crazy. But yeah, that was a massive deal. The pink jersey, the Giro giveth and taketh. I mean, I hate that race and I love that race all at the same time. And then fast forward 4 years later when we won it outright with Ryder Hesjedal, still can't believe we did that to this day. And then the races in between, where I broke my back the next year with great form before the Tour de France, broke 5 vertebrae in a crazy crash. And yeah, I mean, it's an archaic race that anything can and will happen.
The Ryder one in 2012 it was so special. I was over at a Canadian girlfriend at the time, and so few people actually knew what was going on in Canada. And I was like, there's a Canadian about to win the Giro d'Italia. It was Thomas de Gent that launched on the Stelvio on the last day, or still see those pictures of you dragging this much reduced group along.
Yeah, that was a special day. I've told this story many times, and Ryder was my teammate obviously, but roommate for years at that point in time. And that morning we didn't talk. We didn't say good morning. I think we said good morning to each other, and that was it. Like, we did not say, we knew what was on the line. Like, this is game time, dude. We could win the Giro today. And I couldn't believe it. And I stole away and I went on the balcony and shut the door and called my wife and said, holy shit, Leah, I think we could win the fucking Giro today. I don't want to curse myself, but I think it's going to happen. And obviously we'd never talked to Ryder about this. And then I signed in early and I sat on the start line for like a half an hour, just making sure I was the first person, because I needed to get in the breakaway. And then Ryder and I just owned the front of the peloton until we were in the breakaway. He's like, he looked at me, you good? Like, I'm good. And he drops back in the peloton and we went away. And then I waited on the side of the road for which seemed like 30 minutes as Thomas and those guys are going up the road. And I was dying because I had such good legs that I felt like, oh man, I could win today on top of the Stelvio. This would be amazing. But Charlie Wigelius comes up to me and says, "You wait." And he's like, wait. And it's like, and I was kind of soft pedaling. And he pulls up to me. He's like, I said, fucking wait, like stop. And because all shit was going sideways, back behind, and the gap was getting bigger because it was only poor Pete Stetina by himself with Ryder. And so I just killed a bunch of Cokes and I said, here we go. And just hit set on my Garmin and pulled for like an hour and just was begging people and just praying that they're going to start attacking so I could stop pulling. But yeah, what a great. And then Ryder did an incredible day there to top off all the incredible days he'd done before. And then the best time trial of his life in Milan. It was a really, and then we partied till like 6 o'clock in the morning on Sunday night. It was a great month.
It was one of the most nerve-wracking finishes to watch. I can only imagine what nerves were like. as you swung off, having done your job? Is there a sense of relief, like I've done everything I can, or is it still relief filled with, please, Ryder, don't fuck this up?
Well, I had really, maybe almost too much confidence in Ryder in hindsight, but no, I really felt confident that he could do that job. And it was Perito who was absolutely flying, Joaquim Rodriguez, obviously. But it was, I had complete respect, obviously, for the man, and really respect that he could do his job, and he did it. And even more so, jumping. I didn't even take this one. Then we on top when we finished, we started this is the start of the cool down protocol, right? So no one cooled down after finish. You just got on the bus and took a shower, right? So at the top of the Stelvio, there's an old hotel kind of cafe kind of place right there. I don't know if you've ever been there before, but we set up the home trainers like in the lobby in there because it was freezing cold. There's snow everywhere. And Ryder and I are just like on the home trainers. And this is a set, dude, I think we had 6,000 meters of climbing that day. So over 20,000 feet. It was stupid. And we're on the trainer after a 7-hour day, still riding. And people just lost their minds. And Ivan Basso went straight to the bar and had a beer. I've never seen Ivan ever drink in my entire life. So that really just, their heads all rolled off. Even though that was the best thing we could have possibly done in preparation for the time trial the next day, but people just didn't appreciate that at the time. So yeah, there are a lot of cool things that went on there, and whether or not I felt relief, obviously I felt relief that I could finally soft pedal for the last 5 or so K to the top of the Stelvio, but I had complete confidence that he was going to pull it off.
Christian, I could have turned this into a 6-hour or 6-part podcast because we didn't scratch the surface of most of the stuff, but it's amazing to chat with you and just get an insight into where you're at the moment. Thanks for joining me.
Likewise, my man.